Actually, I like the last question because this brings me to the next talk. It's true that genes do not think, they just go through the motion, but animals do think. And usually complex social behavior, like cognition and decision-making, are generally thought to be human characteristics. But as Arnon Lotem, our next speaker, will show, animals do this as well. So sometimes they do it even in a better adaptive way. I mean, for decision-making and reasoning and learning. Yeah, animals have cognition and learning, and this will be the subject of our next speaker, evolution of learning and decision-making in social groups. And without erasing the correlation from Mark, I will move to the other presentation. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me well? Okay? Okay, before I start, probably maybe I should say a few words about Mark Feldman. I mean, it's a great honor to give a talk in such a symposium for Mark. I think everybody knows that Mark is an extremely distinguished scientist, but I would like to clarify to make sure that everyone knows that Mark is also an extremely generous person, a good listener, and very supportive, especially of young scientists, students, and postdocs. Many of them happen to be from Israel. But I think we are very grateful for him for this. Now I'm going to my talk. And as you see, it's about evolution of learning and decision-making in social groups. And, you know, when you tell people that you study decision-making in animals, you get all sorts of responses. And I will start with one example. A few years ago, my colleagues and I managed to publish a paper in Nature. It was about risk-taking behavior in humans and animals. And I was invited to talk about it on the TV. It was London Kirchenbaum. I was really nervous about it, and I found myself waiting to my turn to be interviewed. And just next to me, there was an older man. He was well-dressed, looked very respectable. And it turns out he's a judge. And he started asking me, what are you doing? What are you going to tell us about? And I said, well, we study animals, birds, honeybees, and, decision-making animals. And he looked at me and said, are you implying that animals make decisions like humans? I told him, well, I'm actually going to say that humans make decisions like animals. And he looked at me again and said, look, I'm a judge. My job is to make decisions. It's an extremely complicated process. And I started apologizing. Said, no, I'm not talking about real deliberation like in court. I'm talking about simple decision, intuitive, like you go shopping, when you drive your car. But I didn't know when I was apologizing to him that actually someone very soon will make a study about how judges in Israel make the decision. And I don't know if you've seen it. It was just a few weeks ago in PNAS. A group of people from Ben Gurion and from Columbia, they found amazing patterns in a decision that judges make on the Committee for Parole Request. You see, early in the morning, they approve more than 60% of the requests. Then it goes all the way almost to zero. Then it jump up again, and then go down again, up again here. And you can only guess, and you guess right, what happened here. There's food break. It's quite amazing. Now, there's still argument whether it was the food or the break or some other, sequence effect, but I don't know all the details about it. But it's just to show that even when we expect people to be the most rational and careful in the decision, they seem to be quite dramatically affected by very basic biological factors. Now, what we were doing is something much more simple. We were studying, how people make choices when they press on buttons on a computer screen. And this was a project I did with Ido Erev and Tali Reich from the Technion. They study human decision-making, and Sharoni Shafir and his student Eretz Tzur from the Faculty of Agriculture, and they study honeybees. And I'm not going to tell the whole story, but just the main idea that will be a background for the rest of the talk. Now, basically, we gave people, to see if they prefer to choose, 3 with certainty or 4 score with an probability of 0.8. Now, we didn't tell this to people, so they have basically to press on the, the buttons, and here they learn to get 3, and if they press here, they get 4, but sometimes if they press here, actually they get 0. Okay, so they have to learn the probabilities from experience. And the expected payoff of this exercise is that actually the risky option, is a bit higher, and they should prefer it, but they don't know. They have to learn it from experience. So let's call it the high probability condition, problem 1, which is to see whether people learn to prefer 4 with a probability of 0.8 or 3 with certainty. And there's also a low probability condition. Okay, here, basically we take the same problem, but we just divide the probabilities by 4. Okay, so it's 4 with a probability of 0.2 or 3 with 0.25. So also here, in theory, actually it's the same problem because the ratio between the risky and the safe option is the same. Some of you that may have background in behavioral economics may recognize it as the certainty effect or the common ratio effect or the LA paradox. But here, what is different is that we don't say to people what they should do and what are the probabilities, but they have to behave like animals. They have to learn from experience. They have to probe, to explore the environment, and to make decisions. Now, what is interesting about it is that although according to expected utility theory, people have to behave the same in both problems, what you see is that students, for example, in the Technion, they tend to prefer the risky option in the high probability condition. Okay, this is the dark blue line. And to go with in the low probability condition, they're indifferent. And we come with an idea, how we can explain this. And there is actually a simple learning model that we call perceptual matching that can explain it. And the idea is that, subjects acquire representation of each alternative that is dynamically adjusted by experience. So they, they press on the buttons and they get some experience, 3, 3, 3 here and here, 4, 4, 4, and occasionally they get 0. And they get some experience, they get some representation of this experience in the memory. Now we have to consider, that how to make decisions. So the idea is that a decision rule is applied to determine the action taken in each step based on these representations. And how this can be done. A possible learning, a decision rule, is that they make a competition between samples drawn from the internal representation of each alternative. So what it means is that when you come to decide, you say, what I remember, here I get 4, I remember 4, here I remember 3, 4 is better than 3, so I will choose the one that gave me 4. But occasionally in this case, okay, they can also get 0 versus 3. Then I say, oh, actually, I have 0 here also. So here I get 3 in my sampling of memory representation. Then this time maybe I will go to the safe option, because 3 is bigger than 0. Now, this very simple rule suggests that people will develop a preference to choose the one that was the option that was better most of the time. Actually, in this particular rule, in this case, R should be selected in 4 out of 5 cases if you take this particular example, and you expect a strong preference of the risky option. Okay? On the other hand, if you go to the low probability condition, here, when they do the same, actually they get a lot of zeros. Okay, they press here and they get 0, 0, 4, 0, 0, 0, 0, and so on. Here it gets 0, 3, 0. So even if they don't remember everything, but they have a reliable representation of their experience in the brain, when they try to kind of retrieve samples on random, in most cases they will get 0 versus 0, and then again 0 versus 0. And only in a few cases they will get 3 versus 4, or 4 versus 0, or 3 versus 0. Okay, so in most cases this many zeros will blur the distinction. And actually, if you do the right math, okay, if you do the combined probability of this representation, actually the risky option should be selected all in half of the cases, so there should be no preference. Okay, and this seems to be highly consistent with what people are doing. Okay, now you can also use some different similar learning models, and you get some kind of similar predictions. Now, we were able to show experimentally that when you change the feedback, okay, for example, when you give students the 4 and 3 in clear numbers, so they can see that 4 was better than 3 most of the time, and develop a preference for the risky option. But if you present them a feedback by 40 scatter dots or 30 scatter dots, okay, they actually change their behavior completely. Then they go to the safe option. And this is because here they see many dots, here they see many dots, they cannot really see the difference. So it's like, this is good and this is good. And when you let them to choose between something which is good all the time and something which is good but sometimes also bad, then they go to the safe thing, which is always good. And this was for people, but what was really nice about this project that we managed to work with Shavani Shafir and students and show that actually honeybees that are very far from humans, they tend to behave exactly the same. You give them some learning tasks, it's the same kind of high probability and low probability condition, but this time the feedback was the sugar concentration. And you can see that they tend to develop a preference for the risky option in a high probability condition and no preference in the low probability condition. And for particular examples, see here, for example, here the expected value of 6.7 with 0.8 versus 5 with certainty is nearly the same, but they develop a strong preference of the risky option. And this is expected if they will realize that this was better most of the time, because this is really better most of the time. On the other hand, here, for example, the expected value of the risky option is clearly better than the safe option, and they develop no preference. So from all this little project, what we learn is that when making decisions based on experience, both humans and animals can develop behaviors that do not maximize payoffs, but they can be explained by a simple learning rule. Now, if this is true, and if this is true for honeybees and humans, and actually it was consistent with some studies on rats, and recently with some studies with birds, then you can ask, if you think, why really? Why through evolution? Why simple learning rules? Why not evolve better mechanisms that maximize payoffs? And there are two directions to try to answer this question. Because, if it is so common among many, across taxons, it must be good for something, or why you cannot do better. Now, one type of answer is to suggest that maybe it is difficult to calculate expected value. Maybe somehow the way the brain evolved, the way the brain works, just doing this operation of taking all the numbers and dividing them by, just calculating mean is too difficult. Well, because we don't understand the brain, I cannot really reject this possibility. Personally, I don't like it, but maybe one day we'll find that actually calculating expected value is very difficult for the brain to do. The second possibility is that in the real world, actually trying to calculate expected values may not always maximize your fitness. So it could be that when you have to make quick decision in a changing environment, you want to use small sample to make quick decision, and something like rank statistic that you don't know the distribution of data. Sometimes a simple rule to tell you to go with the one that was better most of the time might work for you better than more complicated rule. Well, we don't really know. I think there's a lot of research in decision making and the evolution of animal behavior is really to trying to resolve these differences between what mechanism of behavior really produce and what is in theory optimal for an animal to do. Now, but if you take one possibility in this direction is to think that in the real world, really humans and many other animals live in social groups. And if they live in social groups, it could be that the decisions they're making are really, influence the interaction between animals. And the fitness consequences of this decision should be examined within the context of a social group. Now, for the past few years, we've been studying the evolution of social and self-learning. We've done it with Mark Feldman and Uzi Mortara and some of my students that I will soon going to mention. And what is nice when you look, for example, at house sparrows, that they are the main model system that we use, when you look at them, you realize that some of them are usually busy searching for food, while others spend some of the time looking at others that found food, and they just scrounge on their food finding. So they spend some of the time following others individuals, and they share their food findings. We call the one that search producers and the one that follow them scroungers. And this is actually a game, because if everybody producing, it's good to be a scrounger. But when the frequency of scrounger in the population is getting too high, of course there will be competition among them, and there will not be enough producer to scrounge on. And then it would be better to be a producer. So it creates kind of a negatively frequency-dependent game. Now, this game is very well known. It has been studied extensively, starting from Bernard and Sibley in 1981, and there's many reviews about it. It was studied mainly in the framework of evolutionary game theory, and when people consider genetic strategy with some plasticity, but the actual mechanism by which animals make decisions were not really known. So what we were thinking to do in many of our projects is to think about learning a decision-making mechanism within the context of this producer-scrounger game. To make it more interesting, I will start with presenting you a question. Okay? Imagine that you are a sparrow, and you have to decide whether you are going to choose. You're walking on this grid of food wells, and you have to decide whether you're going to choose a well that's covered with yellow sand that offer you one seed with certainty, or that you're going for the green sand that you have a chance to find 80 seeds, but with a probability of 0.1. Now, you can pay attention that actually the expected value of the green patches is 8 times higher, so they're much better. But if you're a sparrow, I cannot explain you this, okay? You'll have just to explore and to gain experience. So if you go to the yellow one, you're likely, at least at the beginning, to get 1, 1, 1, 1 very quickly. And if you go to the green, you're going to get 0, 0, 0, and maybe if you're lucky, you get 80, okay? Now, you should remember also that you're in a group, and you are together with other 10 sparrows, that they're all kind of running around in this foraging grid. Some of the wells are green, some of them are yellow, and they have to learn this problem. Now, at this stage, I don't expect you to try to guess what the sparrows are doing, okay, because I have to tell you much more about what we know about these sparrows. So let's try to describe what we know about the sparrows so far. First, people ask me, are they really clever? They can really learn, how complicated their behavior can be. Well, you can see these sparrows almost look like he's reading. And what he's doing is not really reading, but Ronnie Atidia, and together with actually Shimon Edelman and Joe Halperin from Cornell, we are doing another project in which we try to understand how animals learn patterns, and we try to really to give them some difficult problems. And some of them, not all of them, some of them are really able to associate all these shapes with food, and to learn that all these shapes are not food. Okay, so they distinguish between these difficult shapes, and they even when you test them, they even see that this is the common denominator of all these shapes. That means food. And this is the common denominator of all these shapes. That means no food. And if you test them again, okay, and put this informative segment within a novel shape, they can still tell the difference. But these are really, really few sparrows that were able to do this. But what we know about these birds is that this one that managed to do this, they were dedicated searchers. They are the ones that all go and agree. They're good students. They're going from one to one to one. They're not the one that kind of looking around, who is finding food, you know. They're really dedicated searchers. Now, this is not really surprising because Tomer Ilan and his master, he studied some simpler problem, and he found, for example, that if you just see how quickly they learn to associate red or yellow with food, okay, he found that the proportion of correct choices on day 2 was correlated with the number of visits in intact whales on day 1. So it means that we have kind of intuitive result that the more searching step they have, the better they are able to learn. And it's important, normal that, of course, you need a critical mass of learning steps to be able to be, to perform in a learning task. But we actually know that it is more complicated than this. And the reason is that Edith Katz-Nelson, in her PhD, one of the things she was doing, she hand-raised young house sparrows, and when they reach independent, she tested their learning ability. She tested how quickly they learn to associate blue with color and to distinguish blue from red. And after we have this kind of, if you want, kind of quick IQ test, we'll let them, in the first time of their life, to form a social group. And then it could monitor how many of them, what is the tendency of them to be searcher or scroungers. And what she found, actually, high score in a self-learning test predicts later tendency to use producer strategy. Okay, there was positive correlation. Now, in terms of causation, we have to be careful. There are 3 possible explanations for this. The first one, that searching lead to better learning, actually can be rejected in this case. Because first, we tested their ability to learn. Okay, so before they ever experienced the social context. So we can say that maybe in nature, after they become searcher, maybe they will also improve further their learning ability. So they might have kind of a specialization process and a positive feedback, but at least we cannot use this scenario to explain our experimental results. And then we're left with 2 other possibilities. One, there is some genetic association. That for some reason, genes for better learning are associated with a tendency to search. This is one possibility. And the other possibility that we have some developmental association. Somehow they develop to associate with things. Now, before we go further with these 2 possibilities, we might want to ask, is there really adaptive value for this association? Does it make sense that these 2 traits will be associated, and on the other hand, a tendency to scrounge will be associated with poor learning ability? And Michal Abila did actually a theoretical study on this. She tried to consider what happened to a sparrow or many other animals, that they tried to learn to choose between patch types. And we tried to consider a situation, each patch has some payoff with some reward, with some probability of finding this reward. And the idea is that, like in nature, the expected value of this one, for example, if you find 4, is a high reward, but it's very rare to find it. Okay, the probability to find it. It's more a risky patch. Okay. On the other end, this, for example, it's very safe. You always find something, but the reward is very small. Okay? So actually, if you learn correctly, you learn to prefer the risky option. But it's not trivial to learn it. Okay? And it's quite consistent with what happens in nature, because usually simple things it's easy to find, but to find a real treasure, it's not easy to find. It's usually more rare. You have to search a lot for this. And what we try to do, Michal tested a gene. She ran computer simulations, and she tested the gene for a typical individual learning model with J learning steps. And what you find actually that when you have very few learning steps, like when J is smaller than 12 steps, actually it's better not to learn. And it's not only that learning is not helpful. Learning is really bad. It's better to guess than to try to learn. And the reason is that if you try to learn and you don't have many steps, what happens in most cases, you go here, okay, you get 0. Okay, you go here, you maybe also get 0. You go here, for example, to the white hexagon, and you get something for sure. So if you don't have enough sampling steps, in many cases, okay, statistically speaking at least, you learn to prefer the white patches over the black patches, which is actually the wrong thing to do. If you're guessing, at least you will enjoy the black patches part of the time. So actually, if you don't have enough learning steps, it's better not to try to learn. If you have more learning steps, actually a simple learning rule to say, well, try just to learn that black is better than white. Then it starts evolving. It should be better. But only if you have a sufficient number of learning steps, then a complex learning, what we call complex learning, is that you really distinguish between each patch type, and you have a different representation of memory for your experiences in each patch. Then it can evolve. Now, if you remember the whole this game is part of a social system, you can imagine that actually, scroungers are busy part of the time looking for producers, okay? So by definition, they have fewer learning steps. So you might get an association that scrounger will be better off using a simple learning rule, and producer, they are the one that can really adapt more complicated learning rules. And she ran, an engine-based evolutionary simulation, and she found that really you can show that a gene for partial scrounging can evolve association with simple learning, while a gene for a pure producer evolves an association with the complex learning gene. It's important to know that, in both cases, these learners are not really doing the optimal things. They develop a preference, okay, for the black over white, and the complex learner develop a stronger preference for the black square, okay? But they're not doing really optimally. But what is more important, maybe, to pay attention is that the simple learnings that they are scrounger, although they are not behaving, they don't use the best learning rule, okay, if you keep them in isolation, within the context of this game, they are equally successful in terms of gene frequency, the haplotype frequency, okay? They're equally successful. So you can view it as a way to explain stable variation in cognitive ability within the population as a part of a social game. So this is one element, and here in this model, we only consider it in terms of gene association. But you can consider actually that maybe it is more complicated than this, and that you have actually a gene for learning to choose between the two strategies. So let's bring us back to this idea that the association between learning and produce a stronger strategy is actually a developmental one. Now, the reason we believe that this kind of combination, we cannot reject the possibility of genetic association. We don't have data enough to reject it. It's still a possibility. But we have good reason to believe there is a lot about developmental association here. As the reason, again, is that in the first chapter of PhD, what Edith was doing, she really tried to test this idea that young birds really learn to use the right strategy. She hand-raised nesting, and she imprinted them on this stuffed mother of sparrow. So when they reach independent, they were just running around the mother. Young sparrows, they all start as scrounger. Just scrounge for the parents, okay? Just beg and look for food. But what we did, we assigned them to two treatment groups. One, we call them the productive mother, okay? And in this, what you see, okay, Edith is moving the mother, okay? This is a stuffed mother. And the little one is just following the mother. And he did take the mother only to wells that contain food. So actually, it's a good education for the bird to learn that being a scrounger is good for you. If you follow mom, you get food, okay? On the other hand, in the non-productive mother group, okay, what he did there is a bit naughty. She took the mother only to empty wells, okay? This is like a mother saying, go away. I don't have enough food for you, okay? And you see the little one is trying to follow mom, and then it's tough. He's trying to look for himself. He doesn't like it. Try mom again. But eventually he has to learn that searching by himself, this is the way to go and find food somewhere else, because food was located in another place. And after this little treatment, when you take all these young sparrows and let them form a new group, okay, you see that the offspring that was raised in the productive mother, okay, they tend to join more than the one that had the non-productive treatment. So this was the first evidence we had that really the choice in strategy choice in the producer-scrounger game is affected by experience. By now we have much more information about it. We know that sparrows and even other birds continue to use learned strategy choice through adulthood. I will be very brief about it, but we said also Amos Bellmaker used stuffed birds for adult birds, and it showed that if you put stuffed birds near food, and the next day you have an increase in the tendency to scrounge other individuals. And there is another nice study by Jolie Morin-Ferron and Luca Langiardo on different species that they show that if you change the distribution of food, then actually you can move from producer and scrounger, and you have a long-lasting effect that is consistent with learning. And recently we have some further work with Tom Ireland that showed that sparrows, they both learn the relative payoff of producing versus scrounging, so they try both options and eventually prefer the one that works best for them, but they also learn the probability of finding scrounging opportunity. They also learn, how likely is it if I look around, if I spend time looking around, I will find an opportunity, if there's at all opportunity to scrounge them. Now, this is a good stage to summarize what we know about sparrows now and to go back to the question we had before. So what we know first is that sparrows are kind of, they can learn to associate colors and some shapes with the presence of food. We know that, the more searching steps they have, they are more likely to be better learners. And producers are by definition likely to have more searching steps. We know the scrounger, may have less searching steps, and we have theoretical reason to believe that maybe more searching steps allow for complex behavior, for complex learning rules to evolve, while less searching steps favor the use of simpler learning rules. But we also know that better learning is associated with producers, either through genetic association or probably through kind of a developmental association, that they simply learn what is better for them. Now let's go back to this problem. When you consider doing this experiment, it was really nice because we thought we know what we were going to do. Okay, we thought we were clever, and normally we are not. Because my idea was that, that some individual, the one that tend to be a searcher, okay, they will go to the yellow, and they get a lot of experience with the yellow, and they prefer the yellow. And the scrounger, they will look around, and they will see that there is a feast somewhere, someone find food, and they will join him, and it will be a green pitch. So they will learn to prefer the green one. So I thought it would be nice to try and see that this would be, that the searcher will prefer the yellow one, and the scrounger will prefer the green one. They will go for the risky option. But at the same time, Michal really continued to do some modeling, and she said, hey, wait a minute, this is exactly like the model we've been working on. This is a recent paper we had, and it showed that actually in these cases, when high expected payoffs are associated with high risk of failures, okay, the adaptive strategy is actually to ignore your own information. In this case, actually, it's good to only learn from others, only to learn socially. So to go to follow the individuals, the sparrows that found food, and they can only find food, a lot of food, in the green one. So you find the lucky ones that find food, you join them, and then you look at this and you realize, oh, this is green, there is a lot of food there. From now on, I'm only going to search for green one. So in theory, they should do this. But Tom and Elaine tried to test it, and it turns out that our sparrows never read the paper. They seem to do something else, and what they did is also something different than what I thought that they will do. What we get that really, we have many sparrows that develop a significant preference of the green whales, and a bunch of other sparrows that develop a significant preference of the yellow whales. And this group, it was much more than expected by chance. But if you ask, why we got this group, they were not producers versus scrounger. What we found out that actually the ones that prefer the green one, that develop the preference, okay, if you look, the relative success they have in green whales during the 10 steps before preference initiation was high, okay, and the ones that would just, develop a preference for the yellow, they have a very low success in the yellow whales. So in many ways, it is about chance. More precisely, what you find is that the relative success in intact green whales before preference initiation was really different between the two groups. So in simple words, what I can tell you what happened is that, some sparrows were lucky to find food in the green whale in the first trials, or they were just lucky to find them. Okay, and then they start preferring the green. And if you look at the video, what they're doing, they just keep going to green whales from one to another. They ignore the failures and just keep going there. On the other hand, the ones that fail to find that there is food in the green whales, they just keep going to the yellow one. But occasionally, when they see there is a gathering on a green whale, they go, they spend time there, they enjoy the meal, okay, but they go back to look in yellow whales. So they seem kind of to enjoy both worlds. So you might say, oh, they are very unfortunate, they didn't find the right answer. But in a way, they find another way to go to the yellow one and to enjoy also the benefit of scrounging occasionally on the one that found food on the green whale. Now, if we just try to take very briefly the conclusion from this, we see that we try to understand the evolution of behavior, but we see that a lot of it is about the evolution of learning mechanism and about the learning rules and the dynamic that happened during the learning process. And when you think about the fitness consequences of these learning rules and whether they're adaptive or not, maybe they're not always adaptive when you consider individuals in isolation in front of a computer screen, but more you should think about them in a natural social context under which they evolve. Thank you. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Arnon. Please, all the ones who are standing, find a seat. Any questions? Yes, please, at the end there.
I have a question about the
Can you say it again? I don't.
definition of a risky behavior.
The what of risky behavior?
Risky behavior.
Definition.
The definition, yeah.
You mentioned the sparrow video. I seem to remember they searched through the well quite quickly. And I think they can cover much more than 10 wells in one location of the test. And so the taking a risky behavior, would almost always, in each duplication, find a well with 80 seeds. So the payoff will always be higher than the one that picks the yellow well. So why is this a risky behavior?
Well, usually in this field, people define risk in terms of variance, okay? Like the variance in word is the risk of failure, the risk of getting zero, or the risk of getting a low payoff. Now, we define that if you have a variable outcomes, we call them risky. So it means you don't always get a high reward, sometimes you get the little reward. Now, of course, if you're by yourself in the world and you have enough time, and you go for something which is risky, but on the average give you a higher expected payoff, you should prefer it. Actually, a good question of this is that if we test sparrows in isolation, we expect, and we haven't done it, but we want actually to do it. It's difficult to hold them in isolation for a long time. But it could be if you hold them in isolation, each of them, eventually all of them will conclude that green is better for them. Okay, but when they're in the group, okay, very quickly, the whole thing is very dynamic. And the ones that are not lucky with the green one, by the time they might be lucky, then these green ones were depleted by the one that developed a preference for the green one. So the social dynamic is really affecting the dynamic of learning, and it could work together.
Danny?
Yeah. If you go out on the limb and be a little bit more controversial, can you then say that the difference between your scavengers and your producers, and with the learning that was involved in it, could that then be taken one step further when you're looking at multiple intelligences of academic intelligence versus practical intelligence, for example, that the producers, their learning procedure led to more of an academic intelligence more than a practical intelligence where you have less learning steps? Well,
you can take it in many different directions, actually. There is a new emerging field out called animal personalities. And it's all about clustering many traits that going together and create some kind of personalities to different animals, and the idea how this variation evolving. I mean, we know that polymorphism in nature is very common. So why not polymorphism in behavior or in behavioral strategies? And when you have a society that you have kind of different specializations for different individuals, it could be that a lot of this variation is explained by this kind of processes. Yeah, so it can take it this direction.
Yes, please.
I have a good question, actually. The learning of the producer's scrounger behavior, is it more prominent when the sparrows were learning from the parent or when they were learning from their peers?
Let me answer about it. This is a really good question, and we hope to do it, actually. Well, you can find evidence for learning, the effect of learning in strategy choice in both ways, okay? We do get some results that suggest that when the other type of learning, actually you have to pay attention that there's two kinds of learning. Learning whether to be a producing scrounger, and learning what kind of color or shape are associated with food. When they follow others, they don't seem to pay attention for the colors or for the shapes. It means that when they are busy scrounging, they don't pay attention, they don't learn. They learn when they open an intact well. Now, the reason why they do it, it's not very clear to us. I mean, we have some hypotheses, some theories. And we have a good reason to believe that when they follow their parents, actually they will be more attentive. But this is something that we hope to try. I mean, in some animals, like in primates and in crows, it seems that that scrounging behavior actually facilitates social learning. But in some birds, like pigeons or zebrafinches, it's known that actually it's inhibited social learning. So it's like when you follow someone else, you don't pay attention. Okay, if you follow me in the corridor, you don't know to find the office again because you just follow me. But if I tell you pay attention, then you'll pay attention and you'll learn. So it seems that some animals do like this, some do like this, and maybe both.
The second question is, do you have any ideas for attributing learning and behavioral processes to humans?
Well, there's a lot of this is very relevant for humans. I'm not sure I understand the question.
In terms of the actual experiments being run, to attributing how humans learn and behave, or if it's not.
Well, it is a lot. A lot of our cooperation with psychologists and study human decision making, and there is a lot of interest now in comparing between what we know about the evolution of decision making in animals and in humans. So people actually try to understand, the correlation, because we find that a lot of this process seems to be similar. Basically, humans and animals make similar mistakes, and this is where you see that things are really similar. And this is why actually there is a lot of interest in collaborating between psychologists, economists, and biologists in the recent years, and it's just increasing.
Okay, thank you very much, Arnon.
Thank you.